and scholars, teachers and trainers, professors and professionals, those who are watching from the field of science, religion, spirituality, arts, engineering. It is really nice time, nice place, nice action. Listening with 100% present sense of mind. Adorable, respected, the most honorable present Prime Minister Saint Dr. Modi ji, presence of respected doctors and ministers, reverend fathers and mothers, affectionate sons and daughters, those who are watching from the field of science, religion, spirituality, arts, commerce and engineering. It is really nice time, nice place, nice action that you are listening the truth of science and spirituality through poetry and drama. Students and learners of English literature will know how the poet and dramatist in English literature created a landmark and milestone in the history of English literature by writing different type of dramas, poems, novels. What is Lotus Eaters? How do we study it? Lotus Eaters, the poem, relate to the story from Homer's Odyssey. Lotus Eaters is a kind of poem which was written in Victorian age. Lotus is a kind of fruit found on the island of Lotafagal, according to reference in the Odyssey. The effect of this fruit causes lethargy in its eater. It gives rise to a contentment and inertia. It acts as a damper to all desire for activity and progress. It dulled the human qualities of reaching outwardly to others and brought about a self-centered concern with the present. The description of the place is the afternoon of languid streams, the waterfalls, the snow-capped mountains, the valley, the sunset, and the monotonous melancholy atmosphere. The dreaminess of the landscape is transferred into the dreaminess of the man through the eating of lotus eaters. The great Jewish scholar of the Middle Ages, Ben Ezra, invites us to grow old in his company What is the question here? What does Rabbi say about the supremacy of old age? In answer of this question, the great Jewish scholar of the Middle Ages, Ben Ezra, invites us to grow old in his company. He does not regard old age as the worst part of life. Rather, he regards it as the best part. In his philosophy, is the consummation of human life, and the period of youth is but a preparation for it. Man and his future, his life are completely in the hands of God. Life was planned by him as a complete whole, in which each part has its value and significance for the whole. Youth is only one half of human life, and old age is the other half. Therefore, one should not be afraid of old age. Rather, one should welcome it. We should have full faith in God and go the whole of life, including old age, without fear of any kind. Youth is a period of vigorous activities, whereas old age is a time of contemplation. It is the privilege of man to make judgments on the activities of life. The period of youth was a period of mere excitements, and no definite judgment could be passed on this period. But all hectic activities of youth come to end in old age, and the old man can form a true estimate of his life's activities. Just as old age is necessary to find out what is good in human life, so death is necessary to take us to the next higher world. We should not fear death. The death of dear friends, scholars. Next question is groanings. Next question is, how does Rabbi appreciate youth and its aspirations? Youth is undoubtedly the period of high hopes and daring aspirations. The youth is never satisfied with the exciting order of things as flesh he finds in the world and longs for unattainable objects. His ideal is even higher than Jupiter and Mars. He longs to have some figured flame which blends and transcends them all. The poet is not at all critical about the hopes and fears of youth. Annulling youth's brief years, he had sympathy and admiration for the impossible earnings and admirations of youth. It is the greatness of human beings that they have high hopes and aspirations. The lives of man in the period of youth are good and noble, exhibit the divine spark in that. Without these spiritual earnings, hopes, aspirations, man would no longer be a divine figure, but simply a finished and finite clod. Untroubled by a spark, these noble earnings of youth elevate him above the brutes, what do not have noble feelings and aspirations. Next question is, write a paragraph on the note of optimism in the poem Rabbi Ben Ezra. Rabbi Ben Ezra is one of those poems that mould character. Certainly, Browning's message in the poem is an optimistic one. It is not a cheap optimism, an optimism which is blind to the presence of evil or the suffering of mankind. The poem shows that the poet is aware of the sorrow and suffering of man, of the pangs and agonies, failures and disappointments that he has to undergo, but he receives hope from his very imperfection of human life, having an unshakable faith and the immortality of the soul. He teaches us that failure in this life means success in the life to come, and sincere struggle, effort is sure to be rewarded. If not in this life, then in life to come. To Browning, the worst of sin is positive acceptance, sloth and indifference. For who struggles and works can always hope. It is better to strive and to fail than to make no effort at all. We are in the hands of God, and He will certainly give us our due. All I could never be, all men ignored in me, this I was worth to God, and whose will the picture shaped. In the poem, he again and again reaffirms the nobility and superiority of man. Rejoice, we are allied. Rejoice, we are allied to that which doth provide, and not for partake, effect and not receive. Thus man has the divine in him. He is more akin to God than to dogs and apes, and man's soul's immortal. Browning's My Last Duchess exposes the character of the Duke of Ferrara. Give your comments. The Duke of Ferrara in Italy is the speaker of the dramatic monologue My Last Duchess. Through the Duke's dialogues, Browning exposes his character. He has mania of possessiveness for objects of beauty. He has sense of refinement and aristocratic pride, but he is cruel as well as greedy. He is mad about material gains His nature is dominating and manners are snobbish, cynical, and hypocritical. He is jealous of the greatness and popularity of his good natured duchess. He cannot especially delicate emotions. He cannot appreciate delicate emotions. His haughty cruelty is apparent in his cryptic account of the way he gave commands and then all smiles stopped. That is, murdered out of suspicion. And now he expects to have another marriage with such a lady who could bring handsome dowry. Overall, the Duke is void of love or kindness. Discuss the characteristics of the Duchess in my Last Duchess. The character of the Duke, the Duchess, who is no more in the world, stands as a crystallized jewel. The Duke presents the character of his Last Duchess with definite prejudices. The monologue displays the character of the Duchess as being a young beautiful lady with charming features and amiable disposition. Her simplicity and childlike innocence, guileless and purity of heart look through her attractive portrait. She had a fine taste for art and culture. She loved beautiful sight of nature. She had sympathy for creatures. Even she was extremely generous nature to please everyone and generous and genial in her behavior. She was never seen sulky or resentful. It was her nature to please everyone and offend none. It was her ill luck that she got married to a tyrant. It is painful to mark that her virtue seemed vices to the heartless Duke. She sacrificed her life at the altar of a cold-hearted murderer rather than reconciling to his irrational demands. In contrast to her husband, the Duke, she stands as a noble lady with an aura of an angel. What is dramatic monologue? Illustrate by giving examples from the poems you have read. What is dramatic monologue? Literally meaning of monologue is the speech of one person. A monologue is used to explain a situation whether there is a listener. The listener does not interrupt, but the presence of the listener is indicated by the response of the speaker. Such poetic expression becomes dramatic monologue because its functions is to bring out the character of a person. It studies not only personal characters but also mental states, moral conflicts, and intellectual concepts. My Last Duchess. is a famous love poem of Robert Browning. Browning in this monologue expresses the character of the lover who is callous, heartless, and savage in his behavior. The reader comes to know through the Duke's confessional statements that he got his previous Duchess killed and plans to marry to second time. The poem reveals the character of the speaker in a big way. The speaker is arrogant, haughty, and proud, and lacks good qualities of a kind and generous poem. Extremely possessive. The speaker of the monologue is Duke of Ferrara. He is extremely possessive. He is proud that he had sole melancholy. He had sole monopoly upon his duchess, who is no more now. He treated her as a property in house. He always desired to make her behave in the manner he dictated. He would have complete control even over her smiles. Describes the combat between the Saurabh and Rustam and its results. Rustam lifted his spear and shouted, "Rustam!" The cry made Saurabh pause the bewilderment, and while he stood defenseless, Rustam transfixed him with his spear. Rustam exulted over him, and Saurabh replied that his father Rustam would avenge his death. Rustam was still incredulous. He told Saurabh that Rustam never had a son. Saurabh claimed to be Rustam's memories of his early married life came back to Rustam. He could not still sign pricked on it the figure of Griffin, Rustam's emblem. Rustam was now convinced. He cried, "Oh boy, thy father," and fainted when he was brought back to consciousness by Saurabh's gentle caresses. His grief burst forth. He was going to take his life, but Saurabh prevented him by saying that he had but met the doom that was written down at his birth, and that his father was the unconscious agent of fate. He demanded his father's affection in his dying moments. It was a happiness to him to have found his father. What role does Saurabh play in the poem Saurabh and Rustam? Saurabh is the hero of the poem. He is young, bold, enterprising, generous, and chivalrous. In the opening of the poem, he is presented to us, and the keynote of his character is struck at once. To find his father Rustam, is the sole object of his life, and nothing less matters to him. ModiShah, who loves him as a father loves his son, warns him in vain against the risk of life in simple encounter. in single encounter. He believes that if he can distinguish himself in single combat, his father will hear of his fame and come forward to acknowledge him. It proves to be a fatal delusion of life. It proves to be a fatal delusion of his filial longing, his desire for reunion with his father gives a pathetic interest to his character. People have been martyred for religion. Saurabh suffers martyrdom for his father. If there is anything singular in Saurabh's character, it is this willing sacrifice of his life. He is not at all unhappy that he is slain by his father, but he is happy that in his dying moments he is reunited with his father, that he has his father's love and recognition of his valor. He dies in peace and content. Do you see any personal element in Arnold's poem, Dorbeach? Justify your answer. Dorbeach is one of the finest lyrics of Matthew Arnold. It combines a person, note of affection and relationship with a concern for the world at large, the word of nature. The fall and retreat of the waves remind him of the ups and downs of life. There is a sadness at the realization that the age of certainty and stability is over, and the future is likely to be one of strife and doubt. The poet finds himself wandering between two words, one dead and the other powerless to be reborn. That is, the dead refers to old values of life, and the other powerless to be born. Establishing new values, he is in dilemma, and so he suffers from brooding melancholy. The poet addresses his beloved and says that their salvation lies only in their loving and holding fast by one another. What kind of atmosphere has been described in the poem Dorbeach, and how is poet's mood? Arnold seems to be pained to observe the interacting hold of doubt and uncertainty upon people's mind. There was a time when faith, like a sea, girdled the world, filling it with its uplifting influences. But the sea of faith has now withdrawn, owing to the unfavorable atmosphere of disbelief that prevails in the world. The world has now become barren, and men live in the darkness of ignorance, carrying on an aimless struggle. As the melancholic note pervades, the atmosphere assumes a typical Arnoldian element. The poem becomes a lament, a cry of the wounded heart of the poet. It is indeed the elegy on the death of religious faith in the world. However, The final ending presents the essence of Arnold's pessimistic outlook on life. For the world, which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, and that it has really neither joy nor love, nor light nor certitude, nor peace nor help for pain. But the poet also feels that true love only can soothe a sorrowful mind, since the world is like a dark plain wherein men are like foolish soldiers. Men are like foolish soldiers fighting to darkness without knowing the causes. Without knowing the cause, love and faith can avert this gloominess. Summarize the thoughts expressed in Hopkins' poem Spring and Fall. The poem Spring and Fall was composed in 1880. The whole of this short poem is addressed to a young girl, Margaret. It was written when Hopkins was personally feeling depressed. The poet asks the child whether she is feeling sorry over the falling of the leaves in the golden grove. He tells her that leaves are not very different from the lives of men, and she did not feel sorry because she is fresh and young. The poet says that when men grow older, they will see more and more of such spectacles and will not be affected by such sights, but a young boy or girl is bound to be affected because it is his or her first encounter with such reality. When people are habituated in such spectacles, they would not shy even once, even though any number of woods might fail leaf by leaf and lie into the dust. And Fall was composed in 1880. The whole of the short poem is addressed to a young girl, Margaret. It was written when Hopkins was personally feeling depressed. The poet asked the child whether she is feeling sorry over the falling of the leaves in the golden grove. He tells her that leaves are not very different from the lives of men, and she need not feel sorry because she is fresh and young. The poet says that when men grow older, they will see more and more of such spectacles and will not be affected by such sights. But a young boy or girl is bound to be affected because it is his or her first encounter with such reality. When people are habituated to such species, to such spectacles, they would not sigh even once, even though any number of woods might fall leaf by leaf and lie into the dust. He then tells her about the cause of her grief and the cause of human grief. He explains that it is the sense of mortality that grieves human being. He says, we may give varied names to our sorrows. The source is the same. Sorrow's springs are the same. It is true that the girl was not able to express her grief because she was unaware of the proper philosophy of life. However, there was something in her that made her grievous. Thus the poet says that every human being has a dim glimpse of the truth of mortality. Falling of leaves is only a symbol of human mortality, and her grief is due to original sin, for which the penalty of life, mankind, is death. Summarize the thoughts expressed in the poem, The Second Coming. With the statement that the falcon moves round a fixed center. It goes beyond the limits. The falconer has lost control over the falcon. It does not listen to his call. Even the center cannot control the movement. Let loose upon the world. There is violence and bloodshed everywhere. The blood deemed tide suggests a blind passion. It evokes the image of the great biblical flood and chaos which it caused. The traditional and aristocratic way of life, which has always encouraged purity and innocence, is in danger of extinction. The best, the wisest have lost all faith and conviction. The masses, the worst, are fanatical, violent and irrational. In the second and last stanza, the poet says that all this disorder shows that a new civilization is about to be born. The second incarnation seems to be at hand. As soon as this idea comes in his mind, he sees the vast form coming out of Spiritus Mundi. Spiritus Mundi is a kind of storehouse of measures in Yeats' philosophy. This vast form has a body of a lion and the head of animal. It has a pitiless and blank gaze. It is a monstrous that the birds in the desert begin to scream. It is going slowly towards Bethlehem as if it would be Boru, as if it would be born there. Its birth is the death of the present civilization. What personal views of Yeats do you observe behind the prayer for his daughter? In the garb of the prayer for his daughter, Yeats aimed at exposition of his personal view and philosophy, particularly for women. He takes the excuse of prayer for his daughter to propound his viewpoint against the arrogant aptitude of the extremists. He wishes his daughter to grow as a wholesome lady with courtesy, ceremony, and grace, not weak in mind and thought. It is more a personal view of the poet for the ladies whom he doesn't wish to be close to competition to men. That displays his orthodox tendency of a traditional Irishman of reputation with aristocratic manners, fiery and dynamic women like Maud Gonne is not his choice. He looks for soothing laurel trees. The poem is marked by a strong protective attitude and prayer for a balanced life of happiness for the young child. There is uncertainty and instability in the world outside. The future appears to be equally uncertain in these circumstances. The poet prays that may the gift of gods be such as to endow the young child with qualities which would win her friends and happiness. Write a paragraph mentioning the characteristics of Prof.Rock's character. Prof.Rock is a tragic character. His tragedy lies in his inaction. He roams in dreamland to escape from the boredom of present day world. He is conscious about the nature's details of the outside world. He knows the fact that the city folks are indulged in trivialities and what they are pretending to show themselves what they are not. He arrived in a fashionable restaurant where he finds a woman moving about the room and talking of Michelangelo, about Renaissance art, about which they know next to nothing. Perhaps they indulge themselves in such an intellectual conversation about fine art due to the prevalent fashion to do so. Prof.Rock is disgusted over the hypocrisy of modern life. He sees immense possibilities in a minute, so he is not in a hurry to take the decisions. He thinks that it is of no use to make haste because even a minute is enough to destroy or to create, to take decision and then to revise them. Prof.Rock thinks that after the taking of toast and tea, there will be enough time to make decisions, so there is no use to make hurry. Actually, the cause behind this thinking is his deep-rooted cowardice. He is effeminate and does not have the courage to face his lady. Though he is conscious of his growing age, which is lurking through his rapidly growing baldness and this body, yet he craves for romance. He tries to overshadow the growing age by wearing the looks of Edwardian dandy, but his dress fails him to hide his old age. The poem The Soldier displays Brooke's patriotic mood. Justify your answer. Rupert Brooke is one of the war poet of England of early 20th century. His sonnet The Soldier is fervent enthusiasm of a pure and elevated patriotism. It is written in the tradition of patriotic poems like Tennyson's Blow, Bugle Blows, and The Charge of the Light Brigade. Brooke feels proud that he was born and brought up in England. The poem mainly conveys the idea that wherever a man sacrifices himself for England, the place, by implication, becomes a part of England. It is the powerful expression of the fervent love of a soldier for his country. It was a coincidence that Brooke joined English Navy and took part during the First World War. Unfortunately, he died of a septic infection of lip on the Greek island of Skyros. In his eyes, according to his feelings, Skyros became the part of England. What does the poet Rupert Brooke say about the life of the dead soldiers? The poet says that who are now dead were alive before and lived the life of happy human beings like others. Their hearts had all the joys and worries which other men have. The sorrows of their hearts were, however, washed away after they had their sufferings. Thus, their sufferings had this good effect. Their sorrows were wonderfully cleansed. The soldiers had their enjoyments as other people have. When these sorrows ended, they again swiftly changed to a mirthful disposition. As they grew in age, their hearts were full of kindness for all. The poet perhaps suggests that people should not regard soldiers as devoid of kindness simply because they engaged in fighting. They were full of joy when they saw the beauty of nature. The dawn, the sunset, and the various colorful things in the nature made them happy and gay. They felt the soft touch of flowers and furs and cheeks of little children. The poet suggests that a soldier's life and feelings are not different from others. He too has his joys and cares, loves and friendship. Discuss the subject matter of the poem Going. The poem Going describes the imminence of death. The poet has a feeling that death is approaching him. The approach of death is described by him in metaphorical terms. This approach is like the approach of an evening when no lamps are to be lighted. Again, speaking metaphorically, he describes the approach of death as something silken when seen at a distance, but he finds no comfort in its seeming softness or gentleness. Then the poet proceeds to ask a few questions. He wants to know where that knee has gone, which established a close communion between the earth and the sky, and it is under his hands which he cannot feel. He also asks what is that loads his hands. It is a more or less melancholy poem. In any case, it is a poem in which the poet broods over the fact of death and especially upon the nearness of death. It is relevant to point out in his connection that the original life of this poem was dying day. It may also be pointed out that death was one of the Larkin's preoccupations, not one of his obsessions. Death is a recurrent theme in his poetry. How does the poet describe the splendid moving of express train? The express train whistles, then its pistons begin to move, the initial movement of the piston is just like a first manifesto which announces the political program of the future. It does not make a very loud noise when it is in speed. It leaves the station majestically. It appears like a queen. It shows its indifference towards everything all around. It does not blow before anybody. It passes the houses which stand humbly on both sides of its tails. It crosses over the gasworks. It leaves behind graveyard where dead are buried. Gravestones narrate their story. The express crosses the town and reaches the countryside. Then it gathers speed, not in gain a sort of mystery. It appears like an unknown ship sailing quietly in the ocean of night and gleaming there like a bright spot. The ship is aloof and self-contained, a word in itself. Brothers and sisters, dear friends, scholars and learners, those who are studying English literature, what does the English literature appeal to our soul? The real aim of life is to get the freedom of soul. That can be possible only by visiting the needy, downtrodden, rejected people of our society. And it is the great teaching and lesson example which was presented by our nation in front of the worldly people. Where there is dehumanization, inhumanization, it is greatly required the presence of our present Prime Minister Dr. ModiShah, who can easily address them national, spiritual and patriotic values of our nation. And it is the great requirement of the developed nations right now in this present time. Our nation is developing nation, but we are the most developed in spiritual, social, political and economic values. Dear friends, we are to create the milestone and landmark in establishing the features of humanity. And it is rightly said in all the holy religions of our land, humanity is our caste and humanity is our religion. All the starters, beginners, initiators of the different languages, custom, color and caste came on this land. So this land is really fortunate. Every person who born in India is really interested, experienced all the changes, bottom to top, root to fruit. He can analyze, observe and evaluate the whole world by the word of religious scriptures. Our holy scriptures is the fundamental that will make sure that our future will be glorious, nicer, finer and better for the upliftment and betterment of our society and nation. So dear friends, it is our true aim to count the blessings and grace through the social reformist Swami Vivekananda, who addressed the whole world, the America, in 1893 by addressing the two words that were of symbol of characters, my brothers and sisters of the America. It created upheaval in the minds of the people, those who were available at that time, doctors, engineers, astronomers, astrologers, researchers, scholars and professionals, advocates, advertisers, administrators, advisors, those who were available at that time. They stunned by hearing the voice of Swami Vivekananda, because it was the true and pious voice that was created by this character for the worldly people. So dear friend, we are to study English literature time and again for knowing the ins and outs of our pastoral culture, because our culture is the initiator, beginner and starter. It is multi-linguist, multi-sided, multifaceted in all the streams. So within these words, I would like to stop my speech. I thank again God who has provided us this wonderful time to listen the truth of language and literature. Thank you.